At midnight, a beautiful girl knocked on the rancher's door. Her eyes hid a deadly secret. Welcome back to our channel, where the most incredible stories from the American frontier come to life. Today, we're diving into a tale of mystery, danger, and unexpected love, set in the wild territories of 1880s Montana. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You definitely don't want to miss what happens next. And please, tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Are you in the United States, maybe Canada, or perhaps somewhere across the Atlantic in Europe? We absolutely love hearing from our amazing global community. Now settle in as we transport you to a remote ranch in the Montana wilderness, where the bitter winter winds carry more than just snow. They carry secrets that could destroy everything. This is the story of Jacob Stone, a hardened rancher whose quiet life was about to be shattered by a midnight visitor whose beautiful eyes concealed a truth more dangerous than any blizzard. Chapter 1. The Midnight Visitor. The grandfather clock in Jacob Stone's cabin struck midnight, just as the blizzard reached its full fury. Outside, the Montana wind howled like a wounded animal, driving snow against the windows with such force that the glass seemed ready to shatter. Jacob sat by the dying fire, nursing a cup of coffee and going over the ranch books by lamplight. At 35, Jacob had spent the last 10 years building his spread, the Circle J Ranch, into one of the most successful operations in the territory. His weathered hands told the story of countless hours working cattle in all kinds of weather, and his steel-gray eyes had seen enough hardship to make him cautious about trusting strangers. Living alone 40 miles from the nearest town had taught him to rely on himself and be wary of unexpected visitors, which was why the soft knocking at his door made him freeze. 3 gentle raps, barely audible over the storm. Jacob set down his coffee and reached for the Winchester rifle that always leaned against the wall near his chair. In this country, people didn't travel at night unless they were running from something or hunting it. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice that made Jacob's breath catch in his throat. "Please, help me." It was a woman's voice, young and desperate, nearly lost in the wind. Jacob approached the door cautiously, rifle in hand but pointed down. Through the frosted window, he could make out a dark shape huddled against the door frame. "Who's out there?" he called through the thick wooden door. "My name is Elena Martinez. Please, I'm freezing. I need shelter." Jacob hesitated. Every instinct honed by years of frontier living told him to be careful. But the desperation in that voice, the image of someone dying in the blizzard just outside his door, he couldn't leave anyone to freeze, no matter what his suspicions. He unlatched the door and pulled it open, immediately hit by a blast of frigid air that made the fire flicker. What he saw in the doorway made him forget all about the cold. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with long black hair plastered against her head by melting snow. Her clothes, a traveling dress that had once been fine quality, were soaked through and torn in several places, but it was her eyes that struck him most powerfully. Large and dark, framed by thick lashes, they held a beauty that was almost hypnotic. Yet beneath that beauty, Jacob caught something else, a flicker of fear or perhaps calculation, that was there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "Jesus," he breathed, immediately stepping aside. "Get in here before you freeze to death." Elena stumbled across the threshold, her lips blue with cold, her whole body shaking violently. Jacob caught her as she nearly collapsed, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. Up close, he could see that despite her bedraggled appearance, she was strikingly beautiful, the kind of beauty that could make men do foolish things. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I was going to die out there." Jacob helped her to the chair closest to the fire, then quickly added more wood to build up the flames. "What in God's name are you doing out in a blizzard? Where did you come from?" Eleanor's dark eyes darted around the cabin, taking in every detail, the rifle still in Jacob's hand, the isolated location, the heavy wooden door she'd just come through. My wagon overturned about a mile back. The horses ran off. I've been walking for hours." Jacob studied her face in the firelight. Something about her story didn't quite add up. Her hands, though cold and trembling, weren't as rough as they should be from hours of walking through snow and wind. And that dress, despite being torn and wet, was made of expensive fabric with intricate stitching, not typical traveling clothes for crossing Montana in winter. "A mile back?" he asked carefully. "In this storm, a mile might as well be 100. You're lucky you found this place." "Lucky," Elena repeated softly, and for just a moment, something that might have been irony flickered in her eyes. "Yes, I suppose I am." Jacob leaned his rifle against the wall but kept it within easy reach. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia. I'll get you some blankets and see if I can find something dry for you to wear." As he moved toward his bedroom to gather supplies, Eleanor's voice stopped him. "Mr. Stone, Jacob Stone, Mr. Stone," she said, and her voice had taken on a different quality, softer, more melodious. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness. Not many men would open their door to a stranger on a night like this." Jacob turned back to look at her. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the elegant curve of her neck, the full lips that were beginning to return to their natural color as warmth returned to her body. She was watching him with those remarkable dark eyes, and he felt an unfamiliar stirring in his chest. "Any decent person would do the same," he said gruffly, disturbed by his reaction to her. It had been a long time since he'd been in the company of a woman, especially one as beautiful as Elena Martinez. "Would they?" she asked quietly. And again Jacob caught that strange undertone in her voice. "I found that decency is rarer than most people believe." Jacob disappeared into his bedroom, returning with wool blankets and one of his flannel shirts. "This should help until your clothes dry. There's a screen in the corner you can change behind." As Elena took the clothes from him, their fingers brushed briefly. Her skin was still cold, but Jacob felt a jolt like electricity at the contact. Elena's eyes met his for a long moment, and he saw something in their depths that made his pulse quicken, a combination of vulnerability and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." While Elena changed behind the screen, Jacob busied himself making coffee and heating some stew left over from dinner, but he found himself glancing toward the screen more often than he should, his imagination filling in what he couldn't see, the soft rustle of fabric, the graceful silhouette cast on the wall by the firelight. It all served to remind him just how long he'd been alone on this ranch. When Elena emerged, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. His flannel shirt, too large for her slender frame, somehow made her look even more beautiful. Her hair, now dry, fell in dark waves around her shoulders, and the firelight seemed to make her skin glow. "Better?" she asked, settling back into the chair by the fire. "Much?" Jacob managed, handing her a steaming cup of coffee. "This should warm you up from the inside." Elena wrapped her hands around the cup, inhaling the rich aroma. "You live here alone?" she asked, her eyes scanning the cabin's interior once again. "Have for 10 years, Jacob replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Nearest neighbor is 15 miles south. Town's about 40 miles east. It's quiet, but I like it that way." "Quiet," Elena mused, "and isolated. A person could disappear out here and no one would ever know." The way she said it made Jacob's hand move instinctively closer to his rifle. "Is that something you're worried about, Miss Martinez?" Elena's laugh was like silver bells, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh no, Mr. Stone, I was just observing. It must take a special kind of man to choose such solitude, or a man with good reasons to avoid people," Jacob replied carefully. "And do you have good reasons? I mean?" Jacob studied her face. The conversation had taken on an undercurrent he didn't quite understand, as if they were both fishing for information without wanting to reveal too much themselves. "Sometimes," he said finally. "What about you, Miss Martinez? What brings a woman like you to Montana in the middle of winter?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was softer, almost sad. "Family business. My uncle, he's sick, dying. Actually, I was traveling to see him before." She trailed off, pressing her lips together as if fighting back emotion. Jacob felt a stab of guilt for his suspicions. Here was a young woman, probably traveling to say goodbye to a dying relative, and he was acting like she was some kind of threat. The isolation was making him paranoid. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "That must be difficult." "Death is always difficult," Elena replied, but something in her tone made Jacob glance at her sharply. For just a moment, her expression had been completely cold, almost calculating, but when she looked at him, her eyes were soft with apparent grief. "Where is your uncle?" Jacob asked. "Helena," Elena said quickly. "He has a small ranch outside Helena." Jacob nodded. Helena was about 3 days' ride north, depending on the weather. It was plausible, though something still nagged at him about her story. "Well," he said, rising to add more wood to the fire, "you're welcome to stay until the storm passes. Should be clear by morning if this follows the usual pattern." "You're very kind," Elena said, and this time her smile seemed genuine. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," Jacob replied, but as he looked at her sitting in his chair, wrapped in his shirt, the firelight playing across her beautiful features, he found himself hoping the storm might last a little longer than usual. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and snow piled higher against the windows. But inside the warm cabin, Jacob Stone had no idea that he had just invited danger through his door, danger that wore the face of an angel and spoke with the voice of innocence. Elena Martinez was indeed beautiful, and she was indeed in trouble. But the deadly secret hidden behind those dark eyes was more dangerous than any blizzard, and by morning, nothing in Jacob's quiet life would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. Dangerous Lies. Jacob woke before dawn, as was his habit, but something felt different. The storm had passed during the night, leaving an eerie silence that seemed to press against the cabin walls. Then he remembered Eleanor. He listened carefully but heard no movement from the main room where he'd left her sleeping on the couch. Rising quietly, Jacob dressed and crept to the doorway of his bedroom. Elena lay curled beneath the heavy quilts he'd provided, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. In sleep, her face looked younger, more innocent, and Jacob felt a stab of guilt for the suspicions that had kept him awake much of the night. Moving carefully to avoid waking her, Jacob built up the fire and started coffee. The familiar routine of morning chores helped calm his nerves, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in his orderly world. "Good morning?" Elena's soft voice made him turn. She stood in the doorway, still wearing his flannel shirt, her hair tousled from sleep. The morning light streaming through the windows made her skin seem to glow, and Jacob felt that same electric jolt he'd experienced the night before. "Morning," he replied, proud that his voice sounded steady. "Coffee's almost ready." "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Elena said, moving to the window to look out at the snow-covered landscape. "It's beautiful here, so peaceful." Jacob studied her profile as she gazed outside. "It can be. Gets lonely sometimes, though." Eleanor turned to look at him, and for a moment Jacob saw something vulnerable in her expression. "Loneliness is something I understand well. Family business keeping you away from home?" Jacob asked, pouring coffee into 2 cups. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Something like that." She was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake off whatever dark thoughts had claimed her. "Tell me about your ranch, Mr. Stone. It must take a lot of work to run this place alone." Jacob settled into his chair, noting how Eleanor's eyes once again swept the cabin, cataloguing details. "I've got about 2,000 head of cattle, spread across 15,000 acres. Keep a few hands during roundup season, but mostly it's just me and the foreman, Tommy Walsh." "Where is Mr. Walsh now?" Elena asked casually, but Jacob caught the sharp interest in her voice. "Town, takes supplies in every month, stays a few days to socialize." Jacob smiled slightly. "Tommy's got a fondness for poker and whiskey. Should be back day after tomorrow." Elena nodded, filing away this information. "And the nearest neighbors?" "The Morrison place is about 15 miles south. Good people, but we don't see much of each other except during cattle drives." Jacob was growing more curious about her interest in his isolation. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just making conversation," Elena said lightly. "I'm not used to such remote places. In San Francisco, you're never more than a few feet from another person." "San Francisco?" Jacob raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said you were traveling from the east to see your uncle in Helena." Eleanor's cup paused halfway to her lips, and Jacob saw a flicker of something, panic, cross her features before she smiled. "I was visiting San Francisco before I got word about my uncle. I had to change my travel plans rather suddenly." The explanation was smooth, but Jacob's instincts told him it was another lie. "Must have been important to travel in winter weather." "Yes," Elena said quietly. "Very important." Jacob decided to test her further. "Helena's got a good doctor, Doc Patterson. Your uncle's probably in good hands." "I'm sure he is," Elena replied, but Jacob noticed she didn't comment on the name he'd made up. Anyone actually traveling to Helena would likely know there was no Doc Patterson there. Before Jacob could probe further, Eleanor stood and moved to where her dress hung drying by the fire. "My clothes should be dry enough to wear. I should probably be moving on soon." "In this snow?" Jacob stood as well, genuinely concerned despite his suspicions. "The drifts are probably 6 feet deep in places. You'd never make it on foot." Elena turned to face him, and Jacob was struck again by her remarkable beauty, but this time he also noticed the calculation in her dark eyes. "Then what do you suggest, Mr. Stone?" "Wait a day or 2 for the snow to settle. I've got a spare horse you can borrow to get to town when the roads are passable." "That's very generous," Eleanor said, stepping closer to him, "but I couldn't impose on your hospitality any longer." She was close enough now that Jacob could smell her hair, see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Despite his suspicions, he felt drawn to her like a moth to flame. "It's no imposition," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I don't get much company out here." Elena's hand touched his arm lightly, and Jacob felt that electric jolt again. "You really are a kind man, Jacob Stone. I wonder, do you ever regret choosing such a solitary life?" The way she said his name, the warmth of her touch, the vulnerability in her voice, it all combined to make Jacob's carefully maintained defenses begin to crumble. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but especially on nights like last night." "Lonely nights," Eleanor murmured, her eyes never leaving his face. "I know them well." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with tension. Jacob found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by those hypnotic dark eyes. Then, abruptly, Eleanor stepped back. "I should get dressed," she said, her voice suddenly businesslike. "If you're sure about the horse, I'm sure," Jacob replied, though part of him wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. As Eleanor gathered her clothes and disappeared behind the screen again, Jacob tried to sort through his conflicting feelings. She was lying to him. He was certain of that now. But she was also in some kind of trouble, and despite everything, he found himself wanting to protect her. When Elena emerged, dressed in her traveling clothes, she looked every inch the proper lady again. But Jacob had seen the calculating looks, caught the inconsistencies in her story. Whatever Elena Martinez was running from, or running to, it wasn't a dying uncle in Helena. "Mr. Stone," Elena said formally, "I want you to know how grateful I am for your kindness. Not many men would have opened their door to a stranger in the night. Like I said, any decent person would do the same." Elena's smile was enigmatic. "Would they? I wonder if you really believe that." Before Jacob could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Jacob moved quickly to the window, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. 3 riders were approaching through the snow, their horses laboring through the deep drifts. Even at a distance, Jacob could see they were heavily armed and riding with purpose. "Expecting visitors?" Eleanor asked, but when Jacob turned to look at her, the color had drained from her face. "No," Jacob said grimly. "You." Eleanor didn't answer, but Jacob saw her hands tremble as she moved away from the window. Whatever secret she was hiding, it had just caught up with her. "Elena," Jacob said quietly, "who are those men?" She looked at him with those beautiful dark eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Jacob saw genuine fear in them. "Men who want me dead," she whispered. The riders were closer now, and Jacob could make out their hard faces, their predatory manner. These weren't lawmen or concerned relatives. These were killers, and they'd tracked their prey to his doorstep. "Why?" Jacob demanded. "And what have you done?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "What have I done? I've seen something I shouldn't have seen. I know something that certain powerful men would kill to keep secret." The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, their horses snorting and stamping in the snow. Jacob could hear them talking in low voices, planning their approach. "Jacob," Eleanor said urgently, "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I was desperate, and your cabin was the only shelter for miles. I hoped they'd lose my trail in the storm." Jacob looked at this beautiful, mysterious woman who had brought danger to his door and made a decision that would change his life forever. "Get behind the furniture," he said, checking his rifle, "and stay down." "You don't understand," Elena protested. "These men won't hesitate to kill you. You should give me up, save yourself." Jacob met her eyes steadily. "That's not going to happen." Outside, one of the riders called out, "Stone! Jacob Stone! We know you're in there! Send out the girl, and nobody gets hurt!" Jacob positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. "How do they know my name?" Elena's face was pale but determined. "Because they know everything about everyone within 100 miles. That's how they've stayed hidden for so long." "Hidden from what?" "From justice," Elena said grimly. "Jacob, these men are part of a conspiracy that reaches all the way to the territorial capital. They've been stealing land, murdering homesteaders, and covering it up with fake legal documents. I worked as a clerk in the land office. I saw the records, the forged deeds, the death certificates that didn't match the dates people actually died. The pieces began falling into place. That's why you're running. I tried to report it to the authorities, but they're bought and paid for too. The only honest lawman I could find was killed the day after I spoke to him. That's when I knew I had to run." Outside, the riders were growing impatient. "Last chance, Stone. Send her out or we come in shooting." Jacob looked at Elena. Really looked at her. Behind the beauty, behind the lies and calculated looks, he saw a young woman who had risked everything to do what was right. She could have stayed quiet, kept her head down, lived safely. Instead, she'd chosen to fight corruption even when it meant becoming a target. "How many people have they killed?" Jacob asked. "Dozens," Elena whispered. "Entire families. Anyone who got in their way or asked too many questions." Jacob's jaw hardened. He'd spent 10 years building this ranch, creating a life of honest work and simple peace. Now these men wanted to destroy it all to cover up their crimes. "Well," he said, chambering around, "they picked the wrong ranch to bring their war to." The siege was about to begin, and Jacob Stone was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones worth dying for. Chapter 3. Under Siege. "Time's up, Stone." The voice outside carried clearly through the morning air. "We're coming in." Jacob crouched by the window, watching as the 3 riders dismounted and began spreading out around the cabin. They moved with military precision, clearly experienced in this kind of work. The leader was a tall man with a black beard and cold eyes, carrying a rifle like it was part of his body. The other 2 flanked him, one thin and wiry with nervous energy, the other built like a bull with scars across his knuckles. "Tell me everything," Jacob said quietly to Elena, who had taken cover behind his heavy oak table. "If we're going to survive this, I need to know exactly what we're up against." Elena's face was pale but determined. "The leader is Jack Brennan. He used to be a deputy marshal until he figured out there was more money in crime than law. The thin one is called Snake Morrison. He's fast with a gun and likes to hurt people. The big one is Dutch Collar. He doesn't talk much, but he's killed more men than cholera." "How do you know so much about them?" "Because I've been running from them for 3 weeks," Elena said grimly. "They killed my supervisor at the land office when he started asking questions about the discrepancies I'd found. That's when I realized how deep this conspiracy goes." The first shot shattered the window above Jacob's head, sending glass cascading to the floor. Jacob returned fire immediately, his bullet splintering the wooden post where Brennan had taken cover. "Good shooting," Elena said, surprised. 10 years in this territory teaches you to shoot straight," Jacob replied, reloading quickly. "What exactly did you find in those records?" Elena flinched as another bullet punched through the cabin wall near her head. "Land patents that were issued to dead men, death certificates dated before the actual murders, deeds signed by people who'd been killed weeks earlier. They've stolen over 50,000 acres of prime territory, and anyone who got suspicious ended up dead. Who's behind it?" "Someone's organizing this. Senator William Crawford," Eleanor said, and Jacob's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Crawford was one of the most powerful men in the territory, with connections all the way to Washington. He's been using his political influence to legitimize the stolen land, then selling it to railroad companies and mining interests for enormous profits. A volley of shots from multiple directions forced Jacob to duck down. The attackers were trying to pin him down, while one of them found another way into the cabin. "Jacob!" Elena's sharp warning made him spin around, just as the thin man, Snake Morrison, kicked in the back door. Jacob's rifle barked, and Morrison stumbled backward with a cry of pain clutching his shoulder. "You're good," Morrison snarled, blood seeping through his fingers, but not good enough. Before Jacob could chamber another round, Morrison's pistol was in his hand. Jacob dove sideways, tackling Elena and pulling her down just as Morrison's shot splintered the wood where they'd been standing. Jacob's own Colt appeared in his hand with practiced speed, and 2 shots echoed almost simultaneously. Morrison's expression of cruel satisfaction turned to surprise, then to nothing at all, as he collapsed to the floor. "One down," Jacob said grimly, but Elena was staring at him with new respect. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Texas Rangers," Jacob said briefly, "before I came to Montana." That explained a lot, Elena thought. No wonder he moved with such confidence, such deadly competence. Jacob Stone wasn't just a rancher. He was a man with a warrior's training and a warrior's instincts. "Rangers? Huh," Brennan's voice called from outside. "That explains why you're still breathing, Stone. But it won't save you. We've got all day and you've got nowhere to run." Jacob moved to check the front window. Brennan and the big man, Dutch, had taken cover behind his water trough and tool shed respectively. They had clear fields of fire on both the front door and the main window, effectively trapping Jacob and Elena inside. "They're trying to starve us out," Jacob realized. "Keep us pinned down until we run out of ammunition or make a mistake. Or until nightfall," Elena added grimly. "Then they can burn us out." Jacob considered their options. The cabin was solidly built, but it wasn't a fortress. If Brennan was patient, he could afford to wait. But Jacob had one advantage the killers didn't know about. "Eleanor, can you shoot?" "I grew up with 4 brothers on a ranch in New Mexico," she replied. "Si, what do you think?" Jacob smiled for the first time since the siege began. "I think we might have a chance." He pulled a second rifle from a cabinet and handed it to her, along with a box of ammunition. "There's a root cellar under the kitchen with a tunnel that leads to the barn. My grandfather built it during Indian raids back in the 60s. Elena's eyes lit up with hope. "You can escape." "We can escape," Jacob corrected, "but not yet. First, we're going to even the odds." For the next hour, Jacob and Eleanor kept up a steady defensive fire, making it clear to their attackers that rushing the cabin would be costly. But Jacob was also watching the patterns of their movements, studying their positions, planning his next move. "Brennan's getting impatient," Elena observed, as another volley of shots peppered the cabin walls. "He's not used to his targets fighting back." "Good," Jacob said. "Impatient men make mistakes." As if to prove his point, Dutch Collar broke cover and tried to rush the side window. Jacob was ready for him, his rifle speaking twice in rapid succession. The big man stumbled, blood blooming across his shirt, but kept coming with the determination of a wounded bear. Elena's rifle cracked from the other window, and Dutch spun around, his massive hands clawing at the air before he crashed face first into the snow. "Nice shooting," Jacob said admiringly. "2 down," Elena replied, but her voice was shaky. Taking a life, even in self-defense, was never easy. "Stone!" Brennan's voice carried a note of desperate fury now. "You're only making this harder on yourself. The girl's going to die either way, but I might let you live if you surrender now." "What do you think?" Jacob called back. "Should I trust a man who murders families for money?" Brennan's response was a string of curses, followed by more gunfire, but Jacob could hear the desperation in it. With 2 of his men dead, Brennan was starting to realize that this simple job had turned into a nightmare. "He's scared," Elena said quietly. "He knows that if he goes back to Crawford without me, he'll be the one who ends up dead. Then he'll get desperate," Jacob warned. And desperate men do desperate things." As if summoned by his words, the acrid smell of smoke began drifting through the cabin. Jacob cursed under his breath as he spotted the orange glow beginning to flicker outside the back window. "He's set the barn on fire," Elena said, her face pale. "He's trying to smoke us out or burn us alive." Jacob made a quick decision. "The tunnel it is. But first, we're going to send Mr. Brennan a message he won't forget." Moving quickly, Jacob gathered several items from around the cabin. Lamp oil, ammunition, and some old rags. "Ever made a Molotov cocktail?" Elena's grin was fierce. "I told you I had 4 brothers. Working together, they prepared several makeshift bombs using whiskey bottles filled with lamp oil. The smell of smoke was getting stronger, and Jacob could see flames beginning to lick at the barn walls. "Sawite, give the signal. We go out fighting," Jacob said. "Make every shot count and follow me to the cellar when I say run." Elena nodded, checking her rifle one more time. "Jacob, whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you has reminded me that there are still good men in this world." Jacob looked into her dark eyes and saw not the calculating stranger who had knocked on his door, but a brave woman who had risked everything to fight corruption and protect innocent people. "Elena," he said quietly, "whatever brought you to my door last night, I'm glad it did." Outside, Brennan was shouting orders to men who were no longer there to hear them. The fire was spreading faster than he'd intended, and Jacob could see the outlaw starting to panic as he realized his carefully planned ambush was falling apart. "Ready?" Jacob asked. Elena gripped her rifle tighter and nodded. "Ready?" Jacob kicked open the front door and came out shooting, Elena right beside him. The surprise attack caught Brennan off guard. He'd expected them to flee from the smoke, not charge straight into battle. Jacob's first shot sent Brennan diving for cover, while Elena's second shot splintered the wood inches from the outlaw's head. They advanced steadily, laying down covering fire as they moved toward the root cellar entrance. Brennan, realizing he was outmatched and outnumbered by 2 people who fought like a trained military unit, made the mistake of breaking cover to run for his horse. Jacob's rifle tracked him smoothly, and his shot was true. Jack Brennan, killer of families and tool of corruption, fell face first in the snow and didn't get up. As the flames consumed the barn behind them, Jacob and Elena stood together in the aftermath of the battle, smoke swirling around them like ghosts of the dead. The siege was over, but Jacob knew their troubles were just beginning. "They'll send more," Elena said quietly, voicing what they both knew. "Let them come," Jacob replied grimly. "But next time, we'll be ready for them." Elena looked at this man who had risked everything to protect a stranger, who had fought like a warrior to defend what was right. "Jacob, there's something else you need to know. Something about why this conspiracy is so dangerous." "What?" "The territorial governor is Crawford's cousin. The federal marshal is on his payroll. There's no law coming to help us. We're on our own." Jacob absorbed this information with the stoic calm of a man who had faced impossible odds before. "Then, we'll have to make our own justice." As they watched the barn burn and planned their next move, neither Jacob nor Elena realized that this was only the beginning. The deadly secret that had brought them together would soon force them to confront not just hired killers, but the highest levels of territorial government, and before it was over, their fight for justice would change the very foundation of law and order in the Montana Territory. Chapter 4. The hunter becomes the hunted 3 days after the siege. Jacob and Eleanor made their way carefully through the pine forests toward the town of Millerville. The burning barn had served as a signal fire visible for miles, and Jacob knew it wouldn't be long before more men came looking for answers. Their only chance was to take the fight to Senator Crawford before he could send an army after them. Eleanor rode beside him on his spare horse, her posture alert and confident. The frightened girl who had knocked on his door had been replaced by a woman warrior, and Jacob found himself admiring not just her beauty, but her courage and determination. "Tell me more about the evidence," Jacob said, as they navigated a narrow mountain trail. "What exactly do you have that can bring Crawford down?" Eleanor patted the leather satchel she kept close to her body. "Copies of over 40 fraudulent land patents, death certificates with forged dates, and most importantly, bank records showing payments from Crawford's private accounts to known killers and corrupt officials." "How did you get bank records?" "My supervisor, William Porter, was suspicious about some of the land transfers. Before he was killed, he'd been investigating Crawford for months. He had contacts in the Territorial Bank who helped him get the financial evidence. Elena's voice grew sad. William was a good man. He died because he wanted to protect innocent homesteaders. Jacob reached over and squeezed her hand gently. His death won't be in vain. We're going to finish what he started. Elena's dark eyes met his, and Jacob saw something there that made his heart race. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. Jacob, when this is over, what will you do? Rebuild my barn, Jacob said with a slight smile. Fix the bullet holes in my cabin, try to get back to raising cattle. And if I asked you to leave Montana, to come with me somewhere far from all this violence and corruption? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering 3 months ago, he would have said no without hesitation. His ranch, his solitary life, his careful routines, they had been enough. But looking at this remarkable woman who had turned his world upside down, Jacob realized that enough was no longer enough. I'd follow you anywhere, he said simply. Eleanor's smile was radiant, but before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both reach for their weapons. How many? Eleanor asked, guiding her horse behind a cluster of boulders. Jacob listened carefully to the hoofbeats echoing through the forest. 6, maybe 7, moving fast. He cursed under his breath. They found our trail sooner than I expected. The riders came into view moments later, a mix of hired guns and men wearing deputy marshal badges. Leading them was a man Jacob recognized from wanted posters, Blackjack Murphy, one of the most notorious killers in the territory. Stone! Murphy's voice carried clearly through the trees. We know you're out there. Senator Crawford wants to talk. Jacob and Eleanor exchanged glances. This wasn't just another group of hired killers. Crawford was making this official, using his influence to turn law enforcement against them. What's he offering? Jacob called back, buying time while he studied their positions. Safe passage out of the territory for both of you, Murphy replied. The senator's a reasonable man. No need for more bloodshed. And all I have to do is forget what I've seen, Elena called out, her voice carrying clearly. But pretend that 40 innocent families weren't murdered for their land. What's done is done, girl, Murphy shouted back. You can't bring back the dead, but you can save the living, starting with yourselves. Jacob had been quietly moving through the rocks, using skills learned during his ranger days. He could see that Murphy's men had spread out to surround their position, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed Jacob and Elena would try to run. Instead, Jacob was hunting them. His first shot took out the man positioned on the far right, a clean hit that dropped the gunman without a sound. Elena, understanding his strategy, began providing covering fire from their original position, making Murphy think they were still pinned down. Jacob moved like a ghost through the forest, using every bit of cover available. His second target never saw him coming, a deputy marshal who had sold his badge for Crawford's gold. Jacob's rifle spoke once, and corruption claimed another victim. What the hell? Murphy snarled as he realized his men were being picked off. Spread out! Find them! But Jacob was already moving to his third target, a nervous gunman who kept looking over his shoulder as if he sensed death approaching. He was right to be worried. Eleanor's sharp whistle, a signal they'd agreed on, told Jacob that more riders were approaching from the south. Reinforcements, probably alerted by the gunfire. Time to go, Jacob muttered, putting 2 more bullets into Murphy's position to keep him pinned down. The outlaw leader was good, but he was used to fighting farmers and shopkeepers, not trained rangers. Jacob melted back through the forest to where Eleanor waited with the horses. More coming, she reported tersely. At least a dozen. Crawford's not taking any chances, Jacob said grimly as they mounted up. He's throwing everything he has at us. They rode hard through the mountain trails, Elena proving to be an excellent horsewoman as she matched Jacob's pace through treacherous terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as their pursuers struggled to follow their trail through the rocky passes. But Jacob knew they couldn't run forever. Crawford had too many resources, too much influence. Eventually he would corner them, and when that happened, Jacob wanted it to be on his terms. There's a mining camp about 10 miles north, Jacob said, as they paused to rest their horses beside a mountain stream. Old friends of mine from my ranger days. If anyone can help us get the evidence to honest authorities, it's them. Elena studied his face carefully. What aren't you telling me? Jacob smiled ruefully. She was getting to know him too well. The camp belongs to Colonel James Harrison, retired Army. He's been investigating territorial corruption for the federal government, but he needs proof. Hard evidence. And you think my documents could provide that proof? I think your documents could bring down not just Crawford, but his entire network. Jacob's expression grew serious. But, Eleanor, once we hand over that evidence, there's no going back. Crawford will know his time is up, and desperate men do desperate things. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching the clear mountain water flow over the rocks. Jacob, in the 3 days we've been together, I've seen you risk your life for a stranger, fight like a warrior to protect what's right, and show more honor than any man I've ever known. She turned to face him directly, her dark eyes intense. I'm not just talking about handing over evidence anymore. I'm talking about building a life together after this is over. Are you ready for that? Jacob looked at this extraordinary woman who had brought danger and purpose into his carefully ordered world. I've been ready since the moment you knocked on my door. Elena's smile was brilliant, but it faded as the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon below them. They found us again, she said grimly. Jacob checked his rifle and pistol, his face settling into the hard mask of a man preparing for war. Then let's make sure this is the last time. As they prepared to face whatever force Crawford had sent after them, Jacob realized that Elena had been wrong about one thing. Her midnight knock hadn't brought danger to his door. It had brought purpose. For the first time in years, he was fighting for something more important than just survival. He was fighting for justice, for love, and for the chance to build a future with a woman who was worth any risk. The final confrontation was coming, and Jacob Stone was ready for it. But as they rode toward Colonel Harrison's camp, neither Jacob nor Elena realized that Crawford had one more card to play, one that would test not just their courage, but their trust in each other. The senator's deadliest weapon wasn't hired guns or corrupt lawmen, it was information, and he was about to use Elena's own past against them in ways neither of them could imagine. Chapter 5. Deadly Revelations. Colonel Harrison's mining camp sat in a natural fortress of granite cliffs, accessible only through a narrow canyon that could be easily defended. As Jacob and Elena approached the entrance, they were met by armed sentries who recognized Jacob immediately. "Stone!" called out Sergeant Mike O'Brien, a grizzled veteran with a distinctive Irish accent. "Colonel's been expecting you. Word is you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest." "That's putting it mildly," Jacob replied grimly. "We need to see Harrison immediately. It's about the Crawford investigation." O'Brien's expression grew serious as he escorted them through the camp. "Fair warning, Stone. Crawford's been spreading stories about you harboring a dangerous criminal. Some folks are starting to believe them." Elena's face went pale, but Jacob squeezed her hand reassuringly. "What kind of stories?" "Says the girl's a murderer. Claims she killed her supervisor at the land office and stole confidential documents to sell to railroad companies." O'Brien glanced sympathetically at Elena. "Of course, anyone with half a brain can see that's horseshit, but Crawford's got a lot of influence." They found Colonel Harrison in his command tent, studying maps and documents spread across a field table. At 60, Harrison was still an imposing figure, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. He looked up as they entered, his sharp blue eyes assessing Elena with professional interest. "Mr. Stone," Harrison said, rising to shake Jacob's hand. "And this must be Miss Martinez. I've been very eager to meet you." "Colonel," Elena said carefully, "I hope Sergeant O'Brien explained that Senator Crawford's accusations against me are false." Harrison's smile was enigmatic. "Actually, Miss Martinez, I think it's time we discussed who you really are." Jacob felt Elena tense beside him, and a cold dread began forming in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Harrison said gently, "that her real name isn't Elena Martinez, it's Elena Delgado, and she's wanted by the federal government for questioning in connection with several mysterious deaths in New Mexico territory." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. He turned to look at Elena, searching her face for some sign that this was all a mistake. But what he saw there was resignation, not surprise. "Is it true?" Jacob asked quietly. Elena's dark eyes met his, and he saw pain and regret there. "Yes," she whispered. "My real name is Elena Delgado. And yes, I am wanted for questioning." "But not," Colonel Harrison interrupted firmly, "for the reasons Crawford claims. Miss Delgado, would you care to tell Mr. Stone the real story?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. 3 years ago, I worked as a governess for a wealthy family in Santa Fe, the Mendoza family. They owned vast ranches and had connections throughout the territorial government." She paused, struggling with painful memories. "What I discovered was that they were involved in the same kind of land fraud that's happening here in Montana, stealing homesteads, murdering families, forging documents." "Go on," Harrison encouraged gently. "I tried to gather evidence, just like I did here, but they caught me." Elena's voice grew stronger. "They killed the family I worked for, including 2 children I'd grown to love, and tried to make it look like Apache raiders. I barely escaped with my life and the evidence I'd collected." Jacob felt his anger building, not at Elena, but at the men who had hunted her across 2 territories. "That's why you were so careful when you first arrived at my cabin. You've been running for 3 years. The federal marshals who investigated the Mendoza murders were honest men," Harrison continued. "They realized Eleanor was a witness, not a perpetrator. But Crawford's people have been spreading false information, trying to discredit her before she could testify. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jacob asked Elena, hurt evident in his voice. "Because I was afraid," Elena admitted. "So I was afraid that if you knew the truth, that I'd been running for 3 years, that everywhere I go people die, you'd send me away, and I couldn't bear that. Because—" She stopped, tears forming in her eyes. "Because what?" "Because I'd fallen in love with you," Elena said simply. "For the first time in 3 years, I felt safe, protected, loved. I couldn't risk losing that." Jacob looked at this woman who had endured 3 years of hell, who had sacrificed everything to fight corruption and protect innocent people. The deception hurt, but he understood it. In her position, he might have done the same thing. "Eleanor," he said softly, taking her hands in his, "I don't care what your real name is, or how many territories you've had to run through. You're the bravest woman I've ever met, and I love you regardless." Elena's tears flowed freely now, but her smile was radiant. "You mean that?" "I mean it." Colonel Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "As touching as this is, we have more pressing concerns. Crawford knows you're here, and he's bringing an army." "How many men?" Jacob asked, immediately shifting back into tactical mode. "At least 50. A mix of hired guns, corrupt lawmen, and territorial militia that he's convinced you're dangerous fugitives." Harrison's expression was grim. "He's also bringing a federal warrant for Elena's arrest. A forgery, but it will look legitimate to anyone who doesn't know better." Elena pulled the leather satchel from her shoulder. "Colonel, everything you need to destroy Crawford's network is in here. Bank records, forged documents, witness statements, enough evidence to hang him 10 times over." Harrison examined the documents quickly, his expression growing more satisfied with each page. "This is excellent work, Miss Delgado. This evidence will not only convict Crawford, but expose the entire corruption network across 3 territories." "Then why do I feel like we're still in danger?" Jacob asked. "Because Crawford knows this evidence exists," Harrison replied, "and he's desperate enough to attack a federal investigation to get it back. He's not just fighting for his freedom anymore, he's fighting for his life." As if summoned by their words, the sound of many horses echoed through the canyon. Sergeant O'Brien burst into the tent, his face urgent. "Colonel, Crawford's army is at the canyon mouth. He's demanding we turn over Stone and the girl, or he'll consider us all traitors to the territory." Harrison's jaw hardened. "How many men can we field, Sergeant?" 23, sir. All veterans, well-armed and in good positions. Against 50, Jacob mused. Not impossible odds, but not good ones either. "There's another option," Elena said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "I surrender myself to Crawford. Tell him I'll trade the evidence for safe passage for everyone else." "Absolutely not," Jacob said immediately. "Jacob's right," Harrison agreed. "Crawford will kill you the moment he has those documents, and probably us too, to eliminate witnesses." Eleanor looked around the tent at these good men who were willing to die to protect her and preserve justice. "Then what do you suggest?" Harrison smiled grimly. "We give Senator Crawford exactly what he deserves. A fair trial." He turned to O'Brien. "Sergeant, send a man to Crawford under a flag of truce. Tell him that Miss Delgado is prepared to surrender, but only to legitimate federal authority. Sir, also tell him that I have a federal warrant for his arrest on charges of conspiracy, murder, and treason. If he wants to take Miss Delgado into custody, he'll have to come up here personally and face those charges." Jacob began to understand. "You're forcing him to choose between retreat and a direct confrontation." "Exactly. Crawford's power comes from working in shadows, bribing officials, and using other people to do his dirty work. Force him into the open, and he becomes just another criminal." The next hour passed with agonizing slowness as they waited for Crawford's response. When it came, it was exactly what Harrison had predicted. "Crawford's coming up the canyon," O'Brien reported. "Just him and 2 bodyguards, under a flag of truce. He wants to negotiate." Elena checked her rifle one final time. "He's not coming to negotiate. He's coming to finish this himself." Jacob nodded grimly. "A man like Crawford doesn't surrender. He'll try to kill us all and claim we resisted arrest." Senator William Crawford rode into the camp like a man who owned the world, tall and distinguished, with silver hair and expensive clothes. He looked every inch the successful politician, but Jacob could see the cold ruthlessness in his eyes, the same look he'd seen in killers and predators. "Colonel Harrison," Crawford said smoothly, dismounting with practiced ease, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I have a federal witness under my protection," Harrison replied formally, "and a warrant for your arrest." Crawford's smile was like a snake's. "Colonel, I think you're confused about who has authority here. Miss Delgado is wanted for murder, and I'm here to take her into custody." "Under what authority?" Eleanor asked, stepping forward. Jacob moved protectively to her side, but Eleanor's voice was steady and strong. "You're not a federal marshal, Senator. You're a corrupt politician who's been caught red-handed." Crawford's mask finally slipped, revealing the monster beneath. "You little bitch, do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused me? How many good men have died because you couldn't mind your own business? Good men?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "You mean hired killers and corrupt officials? The only good men who've died are the ones you murdered to cover up your crimes." Crawford's hand moved toward his gun, but Jacob was faster. The former ranger's Colt appeared in his hand with deadly speed, the barrel aimed directly at Crawford's heart. "I wouldn't," Jacob said quietly. "So must you came here under a flag of truce, Senator. It would be a shame if you died because you couldn't control your temper." Crawford looked around the camp, seeing the rifle barrels trained on him from every direction. His bodyguards were competent, but they were vastly outnumbered. "This isn't over," Crawford snarled. "You have no idea how deep this goes, how many important people are involved. Kill me, and you'll have the entire territorial government hunting you." "Actually," Colonel Harrison said pleasantly, "killing you won't be necessary." He produced a document from his coat. "I have here a telegram from the Attorney General in Washington. As of this morning, a federal grand jury has issued indictments for you and 47 of your associates. The territorial governor has been removed from office pending investigation." Crawford's face went white. "That's impossible." "The evidence Miss Delgado collected was quite thorough," Harrison continued, "combined with testimonies from 3 other witnesses who came forward after word spread that someone was finally willing to challenge your organization. We have enough evidence to hang you several times over." The fight went out of Crawford like air from a punctured balloon. He aged 10 years in 10 seconds as the reality of his situation hit him. "Fight, what do you want?" he asked quietly. "Justice, Elena said simply. "For William Porter, for the Mendoza family, for all the innocent people you killed, a fair trial, and if you're found guilty, which you will be, appropriate punishment." Crawford looked at this young woman who had brought down his empire, and Jacob saw something like respect flicker in his eyes. "You know, if you'd worked for me instead of against me, we could have made a fortune together." "I'd rather die poor and honest than live rich and corrupt," Elena replied. As Crawford was led away in chains, his empire crumbling around him, Jacob and Elena stood together watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. "So," Jacob said quietly, "what happens now?" Elena turned to look at him, her dark eyes bright with tears of relief and joy. "Now we go home. We rebuild your barn, fix those bullet holes, and raise the finest cattle in Montana territory. And maybe raise a family, too," Jacob asked hopefully. Elena's smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." As they kissed under the vast Montana sky, Jacob reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Elena's midnight knock had indeed hidden a deadly secret, but not the kind he'd originally feared. Her secret had been 3 years of loneliness, danger, and the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she might find a place to belong. And Jacob's secret, one he'd never admitted even to himself, was that his carefully constructed solitary life had been missing the one thing that mattered most, someone to share it with. 6 months later, Jacob Stone and Elena Delgado were married in a simple ceremony at the newly rebuilt Circle J Ranch. Colonel Harrison performed the service, Sergeant O'Brien served as best man, and the entire population of Millerville attended to celebrate the union of 2 people who had risked everything for justice and found love in the process. The deadly secret that had brought them together had become the foundation of a love that would last a lifetime. The end. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the Montana wilderness, where love bloomed amid danger and justice triumphed over corruption. If this story of courage, romance, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments what you thought of Jacob and Elena's amazing adventure. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers from around the world. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones that lead us to our greatest happiness.